Welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. It's the second week of September. I'm Moon Gan-young, again joined by a wonderful panel of foreign journalists today. Welcome, guys, back to the program.
Good to be back. Thanks. Yeah.
Now, South Korea-Japan ties continue to deteriorate with a trade spat that snowballed into a showdown in various fields. That can be traced back to unresolved historical grievances between the neighboring countries. In this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to take a closer look at how different nations are coping with their respective historical issues. Now, on September 1st, the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier apologized to the victims of World War II at a memorial event in Poland to mark the 80th anniversary of the country's invasion, which triggered the global conflict.
Przeleciała przed ofiarami ataku na wielu. Przeleciała przed polskimi ofiarami niemieckiej tyranii. I proszę o przebaczenie.
Germany has apologized repeatedly for its wartime past ever since that iconic moment in 1970 when West German Chancellor Willy Brandt fell to his knees before the Holocaust Memorial in Warsaw asking for forgiveness. So it's been 8 decades since the outbreak of the World War II. Do you feel that it was necessary for Germany to make this sort of apology once again, to face the past?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was a historic day, like just on the 1st of September in 1939. Germany started the Second World War by invading Poland. And I think Poland is arguably the country that suffered the most under Nazi Germany's war crimes. And just, at the square where the German president gave his speech to apologize, that was named under the Nazi time like the Adolf Hitler Square. And there were like swastika flags, all around. And just, several meters away from that, there was the biggest ghetto in whole Europe, where Nazi Germany detained more than 400,000 people, mostly Jews. And also then, there were a lot of concentration camps on Polish ground. So I would say there's no question that, history cannot be forgotten. So you cannot apologize once and then, put it to the archive. I think that's something that should be revived and repeated.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have to remember that Poland suffered more than 6 million of its citizens died. Half of them were Jews during the war. Warsaw, after the uprising, there was a city of 1 million. It was almost empty after the uprising. The war crimes committed there were horrific. So I think you never say sorry enough. I think you should repeatedly show that you care and that's what happened should not be forgotten and you feel sorry about it. And I find something I liked about the word of the German president, that he used very strong words. He said this was a German war crime. He talked about horrific war. And I do think it's necessary.
And I also think remembering.
Yes, I also think that what's really interesting about this is the parallels that you can draw between relations between Germany and Poland and between South Korea and Japan. If you look at how this apology was covered in some media in different places, it's a little bit different. In Poland, there is a resurgence of nationalism and demands from Germany for even reparations from World War II. The Law and Justice Party demands more reparations from Germany, just like South Korea's demand from Japan. In fact, you mentioned Warsaw. Warsaw in particular, there's estimates that they have, the former mayor of Warsaw has said, we want $45 billion from Germany for reparations for the destruction of Warsaw in World War II. So there really is a parallel here, and even divisions within Poland and, of course, divisions within Germany about how that should be handled.
Right. I really like how you drew the parallel between the case in Germany and in Japan and how they deal with their wartime atrocities. But however, of course, Warsaw is demanding for reparations from Germany. South Korea isn't. South Korea, the government isn't demanding for direct reparations or compensations. So there is a difference there. And we will be touching upon that topic. But there was an interesting survey by a Japanese news outlet in 2015. I want to go over this first. The survey asked citizens of both Japan and Germany whether their respective governments had delivered a sufficient apology. Now, 7 out of 10 respondents in Germany said yes. Fabian, how does the German public feel about the nation's repeated apologies regarding its pastime or atrocities?
So I would say there's a wide consensus that apologies are necessary, and I found one survey from last year by the University of Bielefeld, which said that 88% of the recipients or the people that they asked answered that it's like remembering the Holocaust and the war crimes of Germany is an integral part of the German identity. And many also answered that Germany has a special moral responsibility because of its dark past. However, now, several generations later, people don't feel directly guilty of what happened in the past, but feel some special moral responsibility. However, you also have a rising far right politicians who argue actually quite similar, like the right in Japan, who say the past is the past, and that shouldn't hinder us on feeling more patriotic and also being proud. And I think that's the same kind of reasoning that many in Japan's far right use, and that's a little bit on the rise in Germany too. But I would say it's a really minority.
Mm-hmm. So I want to touch upon what Frank actually touched upon before. Many observers point to the contrast in the German approach to facing its past history and that of Japan's. Imperial Japan's 35-year-long colonial rule over the Korean Peninsula left many oppressed and exploited, although several times have there been statements of apologies by Japan. They have been undercut or backtracked by comments from leading Japanese politicians refueling tensions between South Korea and Japan. Now, why do you guys believe that Japan is again denying its wartime history and after having delivered or issued a number of apologies, so to speak?
Well, we have to look at a couple of things here. The war ended differently here than it did in Europe. And the Japanese government wasn't really, dissolved and replaced. It was just restructured according to the wishes of the Allies, essentially, and the U.S. And that restructuring is something that has sort of remained the dominant, political infrastructure in Japan ever since. Shinzo Abe is the grandson of a Class A war criminal. You can't get around that in terms of identity. And the Japanese identity and their political identity is still tied to that period. And it would be difficult for Japan to really, I would say, operate in denial of that with a much more sincere reckoning.
If I can jump on what you said, and because of, at the time, the fight against communism, many Japanese war criminals were not prosecuted because the U.S. at the time decided to keep them in place to steer the Japan in a direction that was according to their interest. So what kind of message that sent to the Japanese population when you show this leniency, when you accept that these criminals stay in power and become respected? I think that really sent a wrong message, and maybe we are paying partly the consequences of that.
I want to hear Fabian's thoughts on this.
Well, I think there's one additional point. Also, because of the 2 atomic bombs, I think there's also a narrative that many Japanese also see themselves as a victim of the war to some degree. But I think, in Germany, for example, there was what we call the Denitrification. So I think the Americans who occupied parts of Germany, they were quite stricter when it came to like building up the new government. You could not change like all the administrative stuff, and later you found out that some politicians actually were Nazis in the past, but basically there was a change, and but also not only a change of like that was opposed top down from the Allies, but also from the civil society. Like there was a student movement who was basically like accusing the parents' generation at that time and demanded like, tell us what you did in the past. And I think there was, the society dealt with it, and I don't see that in Japan at all. Also because people are in denial, like the young people don't really learn about their history in school. So actually, I feel that actually many Japanese people are quite mature in the society in some way, but they don't really know what happened, and they don't know their role and their dark role in modern history.
And that points to another controversy about the history textbooks and the importance of having an understanding of history and to be educated with history. In Germany, I've heard that every student goes to a concentration camp, a former concentration camp, and views it. They have a direct confrontation with their country's dark past. In Japan, that dark past is subverted and pushed out of the education and public spheres as much as possible. And the current government especially uses the suppression of that or has for an excuse of that suppression is that we don't want to harm our national identity and the pride that we want Japanese people to have in their country, and a recognition or inflation or whatever of that dark past doesn't serve our national interest.
日本人としてというだけではなく、人間としてですね、なぜ歴史に正面からですね立ち向かわないのか残念でなりませんね.
저는 역사 문제가 완벽하게 잘못됐다. 잘못한 부분은 일본 정부가 잘못됐다고 해야 해결되지 않을 것이라고 생각해요.
自民党の戦後のその教育政策によって歴史が本当に歪められてきている。これを何とかしなくちゃいけないと。
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited the shrine in 2013, and although he has not stepped foot on that ground ever since, he has been sending offerings to that shrine every year on the anniversary of the end of World War II. In your view, what is Abe's political calculations in doing so? I mean, where does he stand? What does he stand to gain by backtracking on the apologies that's been delivered by his predecessors?
Well, I think there's a few motivations on behalf of Abe. The first one is we need to recognize he's a populist politician. So he's not speaking in terms of advocacy for the entire Japanese population. He's speaking toward his political base, toward his political future, toward the political future of his party and again, his constituencies. And he operates, again, much like Donald Trump. I don't know who stole a page out of whose playbook, but they both are doing the same type of thing, where they're just playing to their hardcore base and then ensuring that they have that support, and then others will see, oh, a lot of people support those ideas, so that seems to make sense. And not worrying about, the liberals or progressives or anti-Japanese within Japan that might feel differently. And that's the primary calculus. There are other things that he wants to do, like a revision of the pacifist constitution that is even more troubling. But his strategy, again, is similar to Donald Trump's, and to appeal to that base and to bring out a very strong expression from that base.
Yeah, he's a member of you call this organization named Nippon Kaigi, which is extremely ultra-nationalist organization. And I think there's of course there is calculation, but I think he's deeply nationalistic. He believes, his grandfather is a former war criminal. I think he believes many things there is a deep conviction, I think, in
Right,
his action.
deep conviction within himself.
Yeah.
Now, historical disputes between the two nations can also have very real consequences in the present day.
근거 없이 수시로 말을 바꾸며 경제 보복을 합리화하려고 하고 있습니다. 일본 정부가 어떤 이유로 변명하든 과거사 문제를 경제 문제와 연계시킨 것이 분명한데도 대단히 솔직하지 못한 태도라 하지 않을 수 없습니다.
I don't know. I mean, in this day and age of global trade, globalization, free trade, is it understandable in your view that historical tensions between two countries could eventually spill over to the realm of trade?
Well, I think we see that in many cases that trade is used as a political weapon. And I mean, I was deeply shocked almost when Japan started the trade war. And the first explanation that they gave was, okay, this is not linked to the historical case, but it was when you talk to people from the embassy, the Japanese embassy, or were digging a little bit deeper, it was quite obvious, and they always changed their narrative. So I think if you use trade as some kind of political revenge, that's really dangerous because you're starting a development and you cannot foresee the end of it. We've seen also, like, I mean, we've seen a strong emotional reaction in South Korea, and arguably also a controversial decision by not renewing the GSOMIA military intel sharing agreement. And what is the next step then? I mean, I think Japan has started something that is a really dangerous dynamic.
What are your thoughts on the Abe administration's stance regarding the issue of the so-called, euphemistically called, comfort women?
Yeah, I mean, I prefer to use the word sex slave.
Yes.
Let's call cat by its name.
Yeah.
I never understood why there is no official from Japanese government who went to meet them. Just go and meet the women. They refuse to even meet this former sex slave. And this is something that for me is really beyond my understanding. I mean, how much would that cost to go to the sharing house in Seoul and talk to these women and show some kind of apology, like show at least that you care about their pain? Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean, the problem of the 2015 agreement between South Korea and Japan was flawed because these women were never consulted, including by their own government. At the time, the Park Geun-hye government did not consult with these women. But I mean, I understand the Tokyo frustration when Seoul decided to scrap the agreement, because I mean, this agreement was signed, and if every time there is a change in government, and the country might end all the agreement you signed before, it's a problematic. But really, fundamentally, I think Japan should try more to do something for the victim, to show that they care, and because now, like, the impression they give is that they just wait for all the victims to die. And this is really wrong, and it's fundamentally wrong, and I don't understand.
Right, I think it's, well, to add on to that, just because I have done extensive reporting on this sex slaves, not only in South Korea, but all across Asia, I think the lack of Japanese politicians or Japanese leaders visiting any of these victims is because that would mean that they would have to acknowledge the fact that the Japanese government was involved or directly forced these women to sexual enslavement, and they deny that. So that is why they do not visit them, and they're basically, it seems to be that they're waiting for them to basically die out.
Of course, maybe they're afraid of looking like they acknowledge the role of their government, but first, I'm not sure how that would be interpreted, and secondly, they're really, I mean, on the purely in in a cold way, they're losing the the public relation war on this thing. Like we have like statue of former sex slave everywhere, like coming in the world, who are being installed in front, popping up. Exactly, we have statues of former sex slave popping up everywhere among in front of Japanese embassies in the world. There is book, there is movies, comic books, reports. I mean, they look bad. They have to do something.
Right. The comfort women issue is a human rights issue, and so this is not something that you can make a deal out of, and that's where I stand, and I think that's where it should stand. Another controversial issue has risen between the two countries in recent days. It's the use of Japan's controversial rising sun flag.
도쿄올림픽 경기장이 우길기로 뒤덮인다면 대한민국 국민들과 아시아인들은 일본 제국주의 만행으로 인한 참혹한 고통을 과거에서 2020년으로 강제 소환당하게 될 것이다.
But the organizing committee of the Tokyo Olympics turned down the request, saying they had no reason to ban the rising sun flag as it was already in popular use around Japan. What are your thoughts on Japan's decision to allow the use of the rising sun flag during the Olympics and on their Navy ships and whatnot?
Well, I think there are several aspects to it, like especially for Olympics. I mean, the Olympic Committee usually is very careful that the sport events should not get too politicized. There are many historic occasions. For example, in the late 60s, there was an Afro-American sprinter. After his victory, he was raising his fist, which was basically the symbol of the Black Panther movement, and then he got a punishment for that. And I think in a stadium, I mean, to use a controversial flag, I think that's problematic, and I can understand the anger here. And I think you have two dissenting views, and probably the victim side, the South Korean side, has more authority to determine what is offensive and what is not, actually.
Yeah, I would be curious as well to hear what Chinese people, Taiwanese people who suffer from Japanese wartime migration or colonialism would feel about this flag. I mean, for me, I don't have my own opinion. As a journalist, I just report that this flag is really considered by Korean people as a symbol of Japanese wartime migration. Maybe sometimes I compare it maybe with a Nazi flag in Germany. So that would be interesting. Maybe I think the Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, should really look deep on this issue and make a decision.
I think it's different. There's kind of the free speech argument that people should be able to wear what they want and display what they want when they go to the Olympics, especially spectators. I think is a pretty difficult thing to do. Even if it's a Nazi flag and somebody wants to fly a Nazi flag and come into the stadium with a Nazi flag, I'm not sure that the IOC should say that you can't do that or remove that person from the stadium.
I would disagree. Of course, freedom of speech has to have some kind of boundaries. They can be either more wider or more stricter, and of course, I think they should be as wide as possible. But carrying a Nazi flag is it's a hate crime, basically.
It's inciting violence, right? That's a rule against. You cannot, in terms of free speech, you cannot tell somebody, okay, we go out and kill somebody else or go out and do violence. That's beyond the bounds of free speech in pretty much any democratic country. So when you wave that Nazi flag, it could be viewed as inciting violence. Just like in terms of, say, South Korean's perception of the rising sun flag, that's inciting violence.
Right. Perhaps it could be applied that way. But for me, this is open to debate, and this is, we'll have to, see what kind of decision is made on this front. But for me, the Nazi flag was a bit of a stretch. But I wanted to just float the idea of, just imagine at the LA Olympics, spectators flying the U.S. Confederacy flag, for instance. How would that be received?
Well, that's interesting because that's already a big issue because it's being taken down and statues of Confederate leaders are being taken down at small town squares across the southern states now.
So that was just a thought that I want to leave our viewers with. This is my favorite part of the session, the episode. If you could summarize today's discussion in one headline.
Understanding Japan's and Korea's complicated past.
A headline would be Germany and Japan, two very different ways of dealing with a painful past.
To Japan, by dealing with the past, you can actually grow and mature as a society.
Basically, you're giving a message to Japan, right? As a German journalist.
Right.
Great. Well, this was a great discussion. I look forward to having you guys again. And that is a wrap for this week's discussion on Germany and Japan's different attitudes in reconciling with their respective wartime history. We will be back next week for more insights and analysis on various issues making headlines. So don't forget to tune in then. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.